Oliver Bearman stood in that room on Friday in Suzuka with 19 other drivers and told the FIA exactly what was coming. Someone was going to get hurt. The speed differences between these cars were unlike anything Formula 1 had ever seen. The FIA listened. They made a small change to qualifying and told the drivers the racing would stay the same because it was spicy. 48 hours later, Bearman's Haas hit the barrier at 50G. The warning they gave on Friday became reality on Sunday, and the question now is not whether the crash would happen, it is what happens when the next one does. Bearman was chasing Franco Colapinto through the fastest part of Suzuka. His Haas was doing 308 kilometers an hour. Colapinto's Alpine, running on an empty battery, was doing 263. Odds a 45 kilometer per hour difference. The red warning lights on the Alpine never flashed because the car was not harvesting. It was simply empty. Bearman swerved left, his tire touched the grass, and the car slammed into the wall. 50G higher than Carlos Sainz's famous crash at Sochi. He limped away with a bruised knee. He was lucky. What the broadcast missed is the number that changes everything. Bearman was 45 kilometers an hour faster on that straight than he had been in his own previous lap. Not because he drove differently, because his own battery state had changed. The speed differences are not random between cars. They are random within the same car from one lap to the next. The FIA had the solutions ready before Suzuka. They chose not to use them. Now the crash has forced their hand. Why the meetings in April are not just about safety, they are about deciding which team wins the championship. Because in Formula 1, safety and competitive advantage have never been the same conversation, and the teams sitting around that table already know exactly which version of safety helps them the most. Lap 22, Bearman is closing on Colapinto through the high-speed section between the hairpin and spoon curve. Engineers call this a 0 kilowatt zone. The cars are flat out, but the electric motors are doing nothing, letting the combustion engine run while the battery recharges. Colapinto's battery hit empty 3 corners earlier. His Alpine lost 47% of its power. It was crawling through the fastest part of the circuit at a speed more typical of Formula 3. Bearman had full battery. He pressed the overtake button and his car surged forward. The closing speed was 45 kilometers per hour. That gap is larger than most highway speed limits. The warning system failed. Those red lights on the rear of an F1 car are designed to flash when a driver is harvesting energy, telling the car behind to expect a speed drop. Colapinto was not harvesting. He had nothing to harvest. The lights stayed dark. Bearman had no way of knowing the car ahead was running at half power until he was already committed. He pulled left to avoid a collision. At 300 kilometers an hour, his front tire touched the grass inside the corner. The car snapped sideways, slid across the track, bounced through the gravel, and hit the outer barrier with its side pod taking the full force. The impact sensor logged 50G. For context, the human body starts losing consciousness around 4 to 6G. Fighter pilots trained to withstand 9. 50G is the kind of number usually associated with catastrophic crashes. Sainz registered 46G at Sochi in 2015. That crash ended with a fire and a helicopter evacuation. Bearman climbed out with help from 2 marshals. He was limping. He was shaken. X-rays showed a bruised right knee and nothing broken. The Haas garage reviewed the data and not one engineer called it a driver mistake. It was a miscalculation caused by a closing speed no driver in the sport's history had ever experienced during a green flag race. The 2026 power unit was sold to fans as a technological leap, more electric power, cleaner energy, a 50-50 split between combustion and battery. What the marketing materials did not explain is how that split behaves on track. The electric motor went from 120 kilowatts to 350. Nearly half the car's total output now comes from a battery that stayed the same size, 4 megajoules, the same capacity as before, but now draining 3 times faster. And the MGU-H, the component that quietly harvested energy from the turbo for over a decade, is gone. No buffer, no passive recharge, just a battery that empties in seconds and takes laps to refill. When the battery hits 0, the car enters what teams call super clipping. The electric motor stops driving the wheels and starts pulling energy out of the drivetrain. It removes up to 250 kilowatts from the system. That leaves roughly 100 kilowatts reaching the wheels. About 135 horsepower. A Formula 1 car running on 135 horsepower on a straight where it should be delivering over 800. The top speed drops by 20 to 30 kilometers per hour. Meanwhile, the car behind behind can be in full deployment, all 350 kilowatts pushing it forward. The speed difference on a single straight can hit 60 kilometers per hour. That is not racing. It is a lottery. Two drivers fighting for position have no way of knowing each other's battery state. The data is invisible. The warning lights only activate during active harvesting, not during the empty battery state that causes the biggest speed drops. So a driver can be flat out, pushing toward a car that looks normal but is actually shedding speed with every meter. The drivers have started calling it the yo-yo effect. Pass a car, get passed back 30 seconds later when your own battery runs dry. The sport they trained for is gone. It has been replaced by energy management software and unpredictable performance swings that have nothing to do with driver skill. The GPDA met with the FIA's technical director on Friday morning in Suzuka. All 20 drivers in the room. The message was direct and backed by data from the first two races. The speed differentials are dangerous, not just in qualifying where the FIA had already made a small adjustment. In the race, during normal racing conditions, the drivers explained that a car with an empty battery becomes a mobile obstacle on the fastest parts of the circuit. They asked for changes to the race format. The FIA's response was that qualifying would be addressed, but the racing would stay the same because it was providing good entertainment. Spicy was the word they used. This was not the first warning. During winter testing in Bahrain, McLaren engineers flagged the closing speeds as a major safety risk. They described the cars as Formula 1 on steroids and called for urgent changes. At the Australian Grand Prix, Colapinto narrowly avoided a crash at the start when he encountered a car with a depleted battery on the run to the first corner. The near miss was discussed in team debriefings but never made the broadcast. The pattern was clear. The data was consistent. The danger was not theoretical. It was waiting for a specific moment to become visible. That moment came on Sunday. And Behrman's crash followed the exact pattern the drivers had outlined 48 hours earlier. The FIA released a statement within hours acknowledging the role of high closing speeds. They confirmed multiple meetings were scheduled for April. 3 solutions were already on the table. Lower the peak electrical power from 350 kilowatts. Raise the harvesting cap so cars can recharge without losing so much top speed. Or increase the fuel flow to give the combustion engine a bigger role. Every solution would reduce the speed differences. Every solution was available before Suzuka. They were not used. Suzuka has gravel traps and grass runoff. Behrman slid through both before hitting the wall. The 50G impact left him with a bruised knee. Now take that same speed differential, that same 45 km/h closing speed, and move it to a circuit where the barriers are concrete and the runoff is measured in centimeters. Baku, the main straight there is over 2 kilometers long. Cars hit 340 km/h with walls on both sides. A car that loses half its power on that straight does not get a second chance. It gets hit from behind or it swerves into concrete. Las Vegas. The strip circuit has barriers less than a meter from the racing line in several sections. Behrman's crash involved a sideways slide across the track and through gravel. On the Vegas circuit, that same slide would end against a concrete barrier with no gravel to scrub speed. The impact forces would be significantly higher. Singapore. The Marina Bay circuit is a steel and concrete canyon. No runoff, no gravel. Just walls. The margin for error at 300 km/h is 0. Jeddah, Monaco, Imola in certain sections. The calendar this season has at least 7 circuits where the consequences of a super clipping incident would be catastrophic. The FIA knew this before Suzuka. The calendar was published months ago. The street circuits were on the schedule. The data from Bahrain showed what happens when a car loses power on a straight. The near miss in Australia showed it was not a one-off. The drivers explained it directly in the Friday meeting. The response was to keep the racing spicy. Now the April meetings are a race against time. Changes need to be agreed, implemented, and validated before the calendar reaches Baku. If the political fighting delays that process, the sport will be taking a risk it should have eliminated months ago. The fight over these rule changes is not just technical, it is a direct battle between Ferrari and Mercedes, and the outcome will shape the entire championship. Ferrari chose a smaller turbo for their 2026 power unit. Without the MG GUH, the smaller turbo spools up faster. The throttle response is instant. That gives Ferrari a massive advantage in corner exit and launch speed. Charles Leclerc demonstrated it in Australia, jumping from 4th to 1st before the first corner. The trade-off is straight line speed. Ferrari loses roughly 16 hundredths of a second on long straights compared to Mercedes. They dominate high downforce circuits like Monaco and Singapore. They struggle at power tracks like Monza and Spa. Mercedes went with a larger turbo. Fine, it takes longer to spool, but delivers more consistent power at high speed. Once it is spinning, the combustion engine does more work, making Mercedes less dependent on battery energy. They can go through super clipping phases with less speed loss because their internal combustion engine is carrying more of the load. That gives them an advantage on tracks with long straights. The two philosophies are opposites, and every proposed fix to the safety problem tilts the balance toward one or the other. Lower the peak electrical power, and Ferrari's corner speed advantage becomes even more dominant. Raise the harvesting cap so cars can recharge faster, and Mercedes loses the advantage they built their entire car around. Increase the fuel flow and the balance shifts again. Every team principal knows this math. They all want safer racing. But they also know exactly which version of safety helps their team and which version hurts them. The April 9th meeting is not a technical discussion. It is a power struggle disguised as a safety briefing, and the result will determine who has the faster car for the rest of the season. There is another layer to this political fight that makes everything more tense. Mercedes has been accused by rival teams of operating their engine above the allowed compression ratio when the car is at racing temperature. The technical regulations set a maximum compression ratio of 16:1. The tests are performed at room temperature. What some teams have alleged is that Mercedes' engine expands under racing heat in a way that pushes the compression ratio above the legal limit while the car is on track. The accusation is serious. It goes to the heart of whether Mercedes' straight line advantage is legitimate or the result of a regulatory gray area. The FIA has responded by tightening the measurement rules. New testing protocols that require measurements at operating temperatures will come into effect on June 1st. That is the Monaco Grand Prix weekend. Until then, the current testing regime remains in place. That means for the next 2 months, Mercedes will continue racing under rules that rival teams believe are not strict enough to verify compliance. Ferrari has expressed frustration publicly about the pace of the FIA's response. Vasseur has made it clear that his team believes the playing field is not level. The timing could not be worse. The April meetings about safety changes are happening while this accusation hangs over the grid. Any change to the power unit rules will be viewed through the lens of who benefits and whether Mercedes' current advantage is legitimate. If the FIA reduces the need for harvesting, Mercedes benefits directly. If they increase the fuel flow, the balance shifts. The compression ratio controversy has poisoned the atmosphere around any technical discussion. Trust between teams is at an all-time low, and the safety of the drivers is now entangled in a dispute about whether one team has been operating outside the rules since the season started. The April 9th meeting is the moment of truth. The FIA has the technical solutions. They have had them since before the season started. The drivers delivered the warning in Bahrain. They delivered it again after Australia. And they sat in that room on Friday in Suzuka and spelled out exactly what would happen if nothing changed. The FIA chose to wait. They wanted to keep the racing spicy. Behrman's crash proved the drivers were right. The 50G impact was not a freak accident. It was the inevitable result of a regulatory system that prioritized spectacle over predictability. Now the sport has a second chance to get this right. The teams sitting around the table on April 9th know what is at stake. A decision to lower the peak electrical power hands the advantage to Ferrari. A decision to raise the harvesting cap hands the advantage to Mercedes. A decision to increase fuel flow reshuffles the deck. There is no neutral option. Every fix helps someone and hurts someone else. And the political war that follows will determine the competitive order for the rest of the season. But there is a larger question underneath all of this. Does Formula One learn from its warnings or wait for its disasters? Suzuka in 2014. Jules Bianchi's fatal crash happened on the same circuit where Behrman crashed 10 years later. The sport changed after that day. It changed too late. Now the sport is at the same crossroads. The warnings were given. The crash happened. The solutions are ready. What happens next will tell us whether Formula One has finally learned that safety and spectacle cannot be separated. Because the most dangerous gap in this sport is not between cars on a straight, it is between the people who build the cars and the people who drive them. The April meeting will show which side wins.